So no, D&D is not therapy. Neither are other TTRPGs. However, there are a lot of studies that suggest that D&D and other TTRPGs are innately therapeutic, which is a bit different. So it being therapy means its specific goal is to take you through the therapeutic process. However, having innate therapeutic aspects means that parts of the game do help you to live your better life and do help you to find a more healthy and natural way of being. So let's take a look at three things that could be happening at your tables. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to go ahead and tell you a game that is therapy. No, this is not a sign from me for you to start role playing with your friends with the aims of it being therapy. If you think you need therapy, please leave that to the professionals and not to your dungeon master. However, this is where I'm going to just break down the therapeutic aspects of D&D and some other TTRPGs with empirical evidence to maybe raise an awareness or an understanding of what might be happening at your tables, and specifically why the game that we all seem to enjoy so much and love is actually benefiting us in the long run. And well, spoiler, an excuse to give your friends when you got to tell them you've got D&D later and you can't cancel. It's because it's therapeutic, bro. So let's go back to the beginning with Bowman. Now, this is a paper that's very early on, late 2000s, about ego safe exploration. Now, before I get into that too much, let's go down to basically what it's saying. Its premise is that any form of social interaction, such as going to work, such as talking to your family members, such as just the process you go through to get dressed in the morning when you go out to an event, they're all forms of performing. They're all forms of acting and role playing. They're things that we do in context to other things that we do to fulfill a certain social role. This is kind of highlighted in the fact that the way you talk to your boss is probably very different from the way you talk to your mum or your partner. We've kind of developed through years different ways of being with different people in different scenarios or situations. So Bowman kind of breaks this down a little bit further to fit in with the role playing aspect. Essentially, what Bowman suggests is that our ego, now we're not talking about, oh, my fragile ego, we're talking about my ego, the thing that is me, the deciding factor in me, protects me from exploring too far. We don't want to go too far from who we are, what we are, because it could be dangerous. People might view us differently, the perspective might shift. However, when you play a character, when you embody that brutish barbarian, what you're doing is you're giving yourself a kind of distance in a way that allows your ego to explore things safely without it impacting you, your character, who you are. So, for example, the anxious, shy person at the table, for them to go out into a loud crowd and be a loud, abrasive person is probably not a very safe thing to do mentally. But playing a loud barbarian gives them that safe distance to be able to experiment with that way of being, maybe integrating parts of it into themselves. Maybe they don't become a loud brutish barbarian, but maybe they adopt the uninhibited speech patterns. They become able to say what they're thinking and feeling without having to hesitate too much, to a million other benefits that might come from it. The same could be said for someone who's normally quite an overthinker. They might play someone who doesn't really think too much. They just do. They might play, like, I don't know, the druid who just wants to do anything that will help the trees, but doesn't want to spend time reading books and scrolls and scripts. They just want to do, throw spells, become animals. So now in Bowman's paper, psychotherapist Corsini basically says that role play in a clinical setting gives us a better way to understand our patients, a better way to instruct our patients, and a way to allow our patients or clients to explore more. And this is kind of the premise for how they do it. And its justification for that is that role play is a perfectly natural vehicle for change and learning for children when they play games. If you've ever seen kids play Doctors or House, where they embody different people, this isn't just them picking up a rule book, reading a game and learning how to play. This is them just naturally picking up cues from other people as to what certain social roles expect. And then they're experimenting with them. Maybe they really like playing with the stethoscope and being the doctor, but they really don't like playing the baker with the stuff in the kitchen. They just kind of do whatever feels natural, whatever feels safe, whatever feels right. And then they internalize certain aspects of that into themselves, and that helps them to become who they are. So somewhere along the line, we forget to explore more and expand our psyche. And basically, Bowman is saying that things like D&D and roleplay give us a way to do that. So while most role players will stand by the statement that they just play it for fun, in reality, there's a deeper psychological mechanism going that's allowing us to learn as we play. Just ask yourself, have you ever played at a table with someone where they started one way and throughout the game they've gradually picked up idiosyncrasies from other things? Maybe they went from being really quiet to now being a bit more of the front man of the group. Maybe they went from having a strict moral code to doing slightly more questionable things. Just have a think. I'm sure you can recognize something that's happened for yourself or someone else throughout the process of role playing. Now, continuing on from Bowman is someone called Adams. They wrote a paper about needs met in D&D, specifically Dungeons and Dragons as well, which is quite exciting. Basically, what I mean by needs met is on the surface, it sounds like you need your needs met. Pretty self explanatory, right? However, what we mean is that everyone has needs, and some of these needs you might be aware of, some of them you might not. So, like the need for democratic process is an inherent need in everybody. This doesn't necessarily mean a governmental voting system, but it could mean you need the ability to impact choices in your life. Like who buys the next round at the bar? What colors are you going to wear at the party with your friends? Or where is the vacation going to be you go on this year? The idea being that you have multiple needs that need to be met, and you can't meet them all in one aspect of life. Your partner might meet certain needs, your best friend might meet other certain needs. You might find certain needs get met at work. They get met everywhere. So, the process of Adam's paper and research was to try and figure out which fantasy themes emerge in D&D that meet needs. Now, they were put into four groupings, which were democratic ideologies, friendship maintenance, extraordinary experiences, and then finally good versus evil. Now, your democratic ideologies, like I said earlier, wasn't the massive governmental things. It was to do with things like being able to make choices. Do you go down the left tunnel or do you go down the right? Whereas the friendship maintenance was more that bipartite thing of at the table making friends or your character making friends in game and you vicariously getting your needs met through that. The extraordinary experiences where some of us lead quite mundane but happy lives, where we go to work, we work a 9 to 5, you get home, you might make dinner, then you might go to bed. Whereas in D&D, you get to fly, you get to fight dragons, you get to cast spells, you get to talk to people from across the world. It's quite an extraordinary game that gives you a lot of opportunities you might not get in life. And so it's another one of those vicarious needs getting met. And then the good versus evil is, I'm sure all of us have a moral compass. This is right. This is wrong. But in D&D, it's a bit more exaggerated. It's a mix of the subtle rights and wrongs and the massive global rights and wrongs. And unlike your normal life where some of those you can't do anything about, in D&D you can. You can decide if you're a good party, an evil party, if the mayor is good for the town, bad for the town, if the thing you're doing is going to benefit the greater good or not. Whereas in our normal lives, there's consequences for some of those things. And so we might not get as involved in helping out morally as we would like to. So, specifically, the needs that were being met were the needs for democratic participation, the need to belong, that's in friendship maintenance, the need for spontaneity, extraordinary experiences, and the need to be moral, the need to have a code. And that's part of good versus evil. So before I go any further, I would just like to say if you're watching this video and you're enjoying it, thank you so much. I put a lot of research and energy into making this content, and I'm really glad you're enjoying it. So if you are having a good time, please remember to like, comment, subscribe. I really appreciate it. Let me know what you thought of the content down in the comments. Make sure you let me know if there's anything you want to hear more about. But most of all, please just do hit that little red subscribe button. It doesn't cost anything, it takes but a second, and it's the best way you can support me and this channel. Well, back to it. So if you're thinking all of this is great in theory, well, it's not just theory, it's actually being researched and studied on a practical level. So my first example being Varrette. This is a paper on research done into the effects of cognitive behavioral therapy and role-playing games on generalized anxiety. So they took the measures of GAD-7 and SPIN-17, which are scales for basically calculating how anxious someone feels or how much anxiety they have inside. And then they took a group of participants through a bit of research that included some cognitive behavioral therapy sections. They took them through something that contained some TTRPG experiences. There were different subgroups that went through different amounts of these aspects. And towards the end of it, overall, the results showed that those that included cognitive behavioral therapy and tabletop role playing games showed a statistically significant increase in their basically comfortability, a decrease in their overall anxiety levels. So, in this specific example, they didn't use Dungeons and Dragons. They used Kids on Bikes, which I'm sure some of you might have heard of. It's another tabletop role playing game, but it put a specific thing to it. So, one thing that does need to be done in future research is to have a look as to whether it's the specific game that has therapeutic benefit, if it's just the therapy that has specific therapeutic benefit, or if it's the overall role playing systems that have specific therapeutic benefit. But this research has been expanded out. So there was a gentleman named Kato in Japan, and he took this research further into ASD, or the autism spectrum disorder, and basically did a very similar thing, did a process of some therapies and some role playing games with different subsets of groups, and basically overall saw that once again there was an increase in social awareness. There was an increase in social capability, there was a decrease in general anxiety. And then finally, there was a paper by Thompson and Majumder, which basically they took a grouping of different role playing games and therapies and they took it to more than just autism spectrum disorder and anxiety. They took it to a wider range of neurodiversities as well as mental diagnoses and conditions such as ADHD and depression. And they did studies on that and tried to look at other uses of therapy as well, alongside role playing games and what sort of applications that could have into real life. There's a lot of papers and there's a lot of research to do with this subject out there. I strongly recommend that you go out and you have a look and you just see what you think of it or have a read. Don't take my word for granted. Take it with a pinch of salt. Go and do your own reading on the subject matter. This is just an overview. But there is such a pioneering sort of community within using tabletop role playing games and therapy together to get great outcomes with people that really need them that it's really worth having a read into. So it's at this point in the video where I should share my own experience with D&D. A little while before 2020, before the lockdowns and such, my good friend Alex introduced me to D&D. He pulled out a character sheet, he put it in front of me, I looked at it and I went, "What the hell is this? I don't know what I'm doing. I don't want to play this game. It requires numbers and math." And within about half an hour I was hooked. We went through town. I ended up beheading one of the bartenders or a sailor, I can't remember, and I got thrown into prison. I met an NPC named Scabs, and Scabs helped me break out of prison. And then I just basically derailed the entire module he had written for me. But overall, it was such a fun experience. Now, we didn't play again after that for a while because 2020 came along. COVID happened. We all got locked inside. A lot of anxiety started to rise up. And I myself got a lot of issues with self esteem. And I specifically got a lot of issues with depression and struggling to socialize and get out there. I took a job as a lorry driver, a HGV driver, a truck driver if you're American or somewhat European. And I just became even more isolated from the world, from the community, from even my own household. Until I started playing D&D again with my friend Alex, my brother, and another friend John. And throughout playing it, my first character, Emricia, for those who couldn't understand the voice, I just began exploring things I wanted to try a bit more and gained a bit of that confidence back. And within about 3 or 4 sessions, My friend Alex unfortunately had to move back to the United States, and I took up the helm of dungeon mastering or DMing or GMing or whatever you would like to call it. And ever since then, I've been hooked. I've run hundreds of games, and I run one pretty much every week, two pretty much every week, depending what week it is. And I have to say, on a personal note, I've had so many players come into the game very anxious, very unsure. And after like 4 or 5 sessions, they really start coming out of their shell and they look so into it and they're begging for more D&D and they're coming up with ideas outside of games of things they can do. And it's just such a cool thing to witness. Anyway, I promised you a game that was therapy, so let's get to it. So the game that is therapy isn't so much a singular game as it is a framework, an idea, an approach, if you will. And it's basically, the moniker is therapeutically applied role playing games. Now, it's just a different take on tabletop role playing games with a slightly different build or structure. So, the specific one I'm going to mention here is A Game to Grow, a methodology of a therapeutically applied role playing game or a TARPG, written by Elizabeth Kilmer and Co. It's trans diagnostic, trans methodological, which basically means it's above using a specific diagnostic criteria and it's above using a singular methodology of therapy. Essentially, it offers a way that you can introduce therapeutically applied role playing games to your players. It goes through everything from the history of this to the introduction of it. It goes into things like treatment settings, like what sort of settings you might need to be sat in with a group sizes, certain therapeutic approaches that might help. It goes through things like collaborative storytelling, turn taking, feedback, and consequences, which are all ways in which we can learn. It looks into different therapeutic models, things like acceptance and commitment therapy, marriage and family therapy, drama therapy. It even goes into things like gestalt therapy. Now, if you don't know what any of these are that I'm saying, don't worry about it. Feel free to look them up in your own time and come back to this video when you can. But if you've ever experienced anything like this, make sure you chuck it down in the comments. And at the same time, if you have any sort of an idea around how D&D has affected your life in a positive way, then please also chuck it down in the comments. Essentially, a therapeutically applied role-playing game should still only be administered by a mental health practitioner, but it's something that I find truly interesting to read as a dungeon master, as well as someone who's training as a psychotherapist, because there is a lot of crossover. A lot of it talks about the fact that we're showing each other empathy, we're practicing social interaction, we're learning how to adopt different identities and how they might impact our lives in a positive way. There's so much crossover that I find it hard to imagine that even just playing the game recreationally doesn't have some form of a positive benefit on us all. Now, I hope you've thoroughly enjoyed this video and I hope you've learned something. If there's anything that you would like a specific breakdown on, please let me know down in the comments. Please do like and subscribe to this video. It's free and it's the best way you can support me. But other than that, guys, I hope you've had fun. I have certainly enjoyed making this video as it's of a really significant interest to me. So have a wonderful rest of your day, evening, night, whatever it is where you are, and I'll see you in the next one. See you now.